The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary, a warm haze of comfort that clung to the air like a promise. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon chopping, seasoning, and hovering over the stove, determined to make tonight perfect for Sarah. She'd been on edge all week, muttering about deadlines and her boss, Richard, who seemed to live in her phone more than she did. Tonight was supposed to be a reset, a quiet dinner, just the two of us, until she dropped the bombshell that morning. "Richard's coming over," she'd said, casual as if she were mentioning the weather. "He's in town, and I thought it'd be nice to have him for dinner." I'd stared at her over my coffee, the mug halfway to my lips. "Richard? Your boss Richard?" "Yeah," she'd replied, not looking up from her toast. "He's been on me about the Q2 reports, and I figured this might smooth things over." "You don't mind, do you, Tom?" Did I mind? Of course I minded. I'd been dreaming of a night with my wife, not playing host to the corporate overlord who'd been sucking the life out of her for months. But Sarah had that look, the one where her eyes went soft and pleading, and I knew saying no wasn't an option. So I'd nodded, forced a smile, and said, "Sure, no problem." Now here I was, apron-clad and sweating, pulling a tray of roasted potatoes from the oven as the doorbell chimed. Sarah breezed past me, smoothing her hair, her voice bright with nervous energy. "That's him. Be nice, okay?" "I'm always nice," I muttered, setting the tray down with a little more force than necessary. She opened the door, and in strode Richard Callahan, all 6 foot something of him, with a handshake that could crush walnuts and a grin that screamed self-importance. He was in his late 40s, hair slicked back with just enough gray to look distinguished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our rent. He carried a bottle of red wine like it was a scepter. "Sarah, darling," he boomed, pulling her into a hug that lingered a beat too long for my liking. "And this must be the famous Tom. Pleasure to meet you, my man." I wiped my hands on the apron and shook his, feeling the bones in my fingers protest. "Hey, Richard. Welcome." He clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to make me stagger. "Smells incredible in here. What's on the menu?" "Roast chicken, potatoes, some greens," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing fancy." "Nonsense," he declared, striding into the dining room like he'd been here 100 times. "It's the effort that counts. Sarah's told me you're quite the cook." I glanced at Sarah, who was busy fussing with the table settings. She hadn't told me she'd been talking about me to this guy. Thanks. Hope it lives up to the hype." Richard plopped the wine bottle on the table and started peeling off his jacket. "This is a '98 Bordeaux. You'll love it. Pairs perfectly with poultry. Where's your corkscrew?" I pointed to the kitchen counter, but he was already rummaging through drawers, pulling out utensils and inspecting them like a general assessing his troops. No, this won't do," he said, holding up our battered old corkscrew. "You need something with a bit more finesse. I'll bring you one next time." "Next time." I shot Sarah a look, but she was too busy pouring water into glasses to notice. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm. He was her boss. This was her career. I could handle one night. Dinner started innocently enough. I served the food, and Sarah kept the conversation flowing, asking Richard about his latest trip to London. He launched into a story about negotiating a deal with some tech mogul, gesturing with his fork like he was conducting an orchestra. I nodded along, cutting into my chicken, trying to ignore the way he kept interrupting Sarah to correct her or finish her sentences. "So, Tom," he said, turning to me mid-bite, "what do you do?" "Sarah's mentioned you're in, what was it?" "Construction. Carpentry," I corrected, wiping my mouth. I build furniture, mostly custom pieces. He raised an eyebrow, swirling his wine. Furniture, huh? That's quaint. Must be nice to work with your hands. I couldn't do it, too much sitting still for my taste. It's not about sitting still, I said, keeping my voice even. It's about precision. Takes focus. Sure, he said, waving a hand dismissively. But let's be real, it's not exactly high stakes, is it? Not like what Sarah and I deal with. Deadlines, clients, millions on the line. You ever think about scaling up, turning it into something bigger? I bristled but kept my smile plastered on. I like it the way it is. Keeps me sane. He chuckled, a deep, patronizing sound. Fair enough. Sanity's overrated anyway. The rest of the meal went like that, Richard dominating the conversation, tossing out backhanded compliments, and acting like the dining room was his personal stage. He critiqued the chicken, a touch dry, but the seasoning spot on, rearranged the table settings to improve the flow, and at one point, got up to adjust the thermostat because it's a bit stuffy in here, don't you think? Sarah laughed it off, but I could feel my patience fraying. By the time I cleared the plates, I was gripping them hard enough to leave dents in the ceramic. I retreated to the kitchen to start on dessert, a simple apple tart I'd made earlier, hoping for a minute to cool off. No such luck. Richard followed me in, leaning against the counter with his wine glass dangling from his fingers. Need a hand? He asked, though he made no move to help. Nah, I've got it, I said, slicing the tart with more force than necessary. Good man. You're a real trooper, putting up with all this domestic stuff. Sarah's lucky to have you. I set the knife down and turned to face him. She's the one who keeps everything together. I just cook. He grinned, oblivious to the edge in my voice. Oh, she's a star, no question. Best assistant I've ever had. I'd be lost without her. You know, I told her last week, Sarah, you're wasted on these small projects. You need to step up, take on more. She's got potential, real potential. She's already doing plenty, I said, my jaw tightening. She works late most nights because of you. Richard blinked, then laughed. Because of me? Come on, Tom, it's the job. She loves it. You don't get ahead by clocking out at 5. I didn't respond, just plated the tart and handed him one. He took it, still chuckling, and wandered back to the dining room. I stood there, staring at the sink, feeling the heat creep up my neck. This guy didn't just act like he owned the place, he acted like he owned her, too. Back at the table, Sarah was trying to steer the conversation to neutral ground, asking about Richard's kids. He launched into another monologue, barely pausing to eat, while I sat there picking at my dessert. Then it happened, the moment that snapped something loose inside me. So, Tom, he said, leaning back in his chair, you ever think about moving out of this place? It's cozy, sure, but Sarah's on her way up. You don't want to hold her back with, well, this. He gestured vaguely at the room, the walls I'd painted, the table I'd built. Sarah went still, her fork hovering over her plate. I put mine down and looked at him, really looked at him, at the smug tilt of his mouth and the way he sprawled in my chair like it was his throne. Richard, I said, my voice low and steady, can I talk to you for a minute? In my office? He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Your office? Sure, lead the way. Sarah shot me a worried glance, but I ignored it, standing up and walking to the small room off the hall where I kept my tools and sketches. Richard followed, still holding his wine, his footsteps loud against the hardwood. I closed the door behind us and turned to face him. All right, I said, crossing my arms. What's your deal? He blinked, then laughed. My deal? What are you talking about? You come into my house, I said, stepping closer, eat my food, rearrange my table, tell me my life's not good enough for my wife. You've been acting like you own the place since you walked in. So I'm asking, what's your deal? Richard's smile faltered, but only for a second. He took a sip of wine, stalling, then set the glass on my desk. Look, Tom, I didn't mean to ruffle your feathers. I'm just direct. It's how I am. Sarah knows that. This isn't about Sarah, I said. This is about you. You don't get to waltz in here and talk down to me like I'm some hired help. This is my home. She's my wife. He held up his hands, placating. Whoa, easy. I'm not the enemy here. I'm her boss, yeah, but I'm also her ticket to something bigger. You want her stuck in the same rut forever. She's not in a rut, I snapped. She's happy. Or she was, until you started piling on the late nights and the pressure. You think you're doing her a favor, but you're running her ragged. Richard's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something real behind the bluster, anger, maybe, or wounded pride. You don't know what you're talking about. She's got ambition. She wants this. Did she tell you that? I asked. Or did you decide it for her? He didn't answer, just stared at me, his breathing heavy. I could hear Sarah moving around in the dining room, probably wondering what the hell was taking so long. I lowered my voice, but kept it firm. Here's the thing, Richard. You don't get to come in here and judge us. You don't get to act like you're better because you've got a corner office and a fancy suit. I don't care who you are out there, this is my house. And if you can't respect that, you can leave. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he picked up his glass, drained it, and set it back down with a deliberate clink. You're a real piece of work, Tom, he said, his tone cold. But fine. I'll play nice. For Sarah's sake. He brushed past me, shoulder bumping mine, and walked out. I stood there, fists clenched, listening to the murmur of voices as he rejoined Sarah. When I finally came back, he was all smiles again, complimenting the tart like nothing had happened. Sarah caught my eye, her expression a mix of relief and confusion, but she didn't ask. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Richard left around 10, shaking my hand with a grip that felt like a challenge, promising to catch up soon. Sarah closed the door behind him and turned to me, arms crossed. What was that about? She asked. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. He was being an ass. I called him on it. She frowned, then softened. He's just. Richard. He doesn't mean half of it. Maybe, I said. But I'm not letting him walk all over us. Not here. She studied me for a moment, then stepped closer, resting her head against my chest. You're ridiculous, you know that. Yeah, I said, wrapping my arms around her. But you married me. She laughed, and the tension melted away, leaving just the two of us in the quiet of our home. Richard could have his empire, his wine, his ego. This was mine.